seems like this is possibly the most awkward conversation you could embark on. How do I bring up body odor with an employee who otherwise does great work without making it awkward? Let's start with Terry before we get into
Okay.
the law, can we?
Of course.
Sure.
So I think when people think of body odor, they think of obviously the negative type of body odor, which is obvious definitely the harder thing to bring up with an employee. But before we dive into that, just bringing up a few other things that could come up with body odor. Some people are wearing excessive perfumes or colognes that are affecting employees' allergies. Some people have a strong scent of cigarette smoke. It could be any type of body odor. But I think, Pete, what you're probably bringing up is probably the one that's most uncomfortable to bring up when somebody is being reported by other employees of having a smell that you need to address. So there are several reasons why we have to address it, and I'll leave those legal reasons to Tom in just a minute. But as far as having the conversation, it's important to be sensitive, know that it will be a difficult discussion to have, but bringing that person aside, sitting them down, having a talk with them just to say that this has been brought to our attention. It's a tough topic, but I'd rather talk to you about it directly than for you to hear it from other employees. So we just need to talk about what's been brought to our attention and then go from there to have these discussions, let them know what's come up, listen, find out if there's reasons behind it. There sometimes are, whether they're reasons that might be financially related or reasons that might be medically related. Mm-hmm. So I would say really being sensitive, empathetic, listening are important to starting the discussion.
At what point, you're also, I assume, bringing up cultural reasons, right? If you work in a cross-geographic team with different expectations, sort of sociocultural expectations of body odor gets in the way too. So, all right, Tom, why is it legally touchy ground?
Well, I mean, a couple of things come to mind immediately. One of them is the employee who's come to you and complained about this may have some form of what they call multiple chemical sensitivity disorder, which could be an allergic reaction, could be some sort of very sensitive reaction to a scent or an odor, cologne, body odor, whatever it might be. But that could be one thing that triggered it. And if those two people happen to sit next to each other in the workplace, that could trigger that problem. The next segue over would be the Americans with Disabilities Act, which, back to Terry's point about people saying there's a reason why this issue sits out there, is that the person may have difficulty with, an illness, something in their body and their background that causes that odor to emanate from them. Then the question becomes much more of a legal one. What can the company do? What must it try and do? What can it do? What presents an undue hardship and just is too much to do?
I would love to hear from you, Tom, some of those examples. Have you run into this specifically from a legal context?
A couple of times it's come up in Helpline. Terry, feel free to jump in too, but it usually goes with the Americans with Disabilities Act rather than the chemical sensitivity disorder. People report that they have some disability or some condition that they believe is a disability that may have caused that odor to emanate from them. So every so often it comes up on the helpline as to what may be going on with that person or not. Terry, do you have anything you recall?
Sure. I think another example that comes up is if there is not a medical condition, as Tom's indicating, what can come up, and Tom can expand on this, is it can create a hostile work environment. It's something that people don't think of immediately when it comes to body odor in the workplace. But that is something that could come from this if there's enough concern. And Tom, I don't know if you want to touch on that briefly.
Sure. The discrimination laws in most states in the country would offer some possible relief here. Certainly it's something, if you were concerned and motivated, you'd want to explore it. I mean, employees may consider exploring that as an option. Would be to pursue and say, I feel like this is maybe uncomfortable in the workplace. The company fails to do anything about it. Therefore, I think it's created this hostile work environment. Whether that fully is recognized under the law, might be just, pushing the bounds as to what constitutes a legal theory for relief. But you never know. You never know where the courts may go.
Is the privacy situation kind of a fine line, or is it obvious? I'm legitimately wondering if the fact that other peers are reporting a body odor issue becomes an issue of privacy for that employee.
Well, and at least the law in Massachusetts is, you think of privacy would be putting your two hands in front of you and weighing out who has the right to know, who has the right to do something.
Mm-hmm.
Does it the employee's privacy versus the employer's right to address this? So 4 or 5 employees come forward to HR and say, this is a problem. The company acknowledges it's a problem, is aware of the problem. Then I think the privacy side goes away, and the argument is the company has to do something about it. And I think you'll see privacy show up in the other 2 issues we're going to talk about today as well. But at some point, unless the person's working remotely, isolated in some situation, then we could try and protect their privacy a bit more. If they're
Mm-hmm.
interacting with fellow coworkers, customers, clients, then I think the company is effectively duty bound to try and resolve the issue as quickly as possible, and the privacy won't be a concern.
Terry, can you wrap us up and help us think through some of the things that a company can do? If a company's duty bound to take action, what does the end of this awkward conversation sound like? Because my assumption is we want to make the office environment feel safe and welcoming while going through, this sort of company awareness of my body odor.
Sure. And as you're mentioning, body odor that might not be excessive perfumes and things of that
Mm-hmm.
nature, we would have the conversation, explain, as Tom mentioned, if multiple employees have come forward. We just need to talk about this, talk about a solution. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes it's a financial situation.
Mm-hmm.
There's been scenarios where, as a company, we've purchased products for an employee because they just admitted they could not financially afford it. So that was one solution. When it came to somebody that was using excessive perfumes or sprays of those natures, we were able to talk to that person about something significant like allergies. You're impacting somebody's health right now. You're not meaning to, but there's reasons why we have to do that. And we would put a posting up, actually, what I've done in the past, indicating that due to allergies, we can't have any type of excess scents in the workplace. So we're able to attack it from that angle. But again, it's really having that discussion, listening, being sympathetic and empathetic to people, because once people hear about this, they either react one of 2 ways. In my experience, they're very defensive, and they get upset and they deny, and there's no way that they want to see it. And the other is embarrassment. If somebody hears this, they weren't aware that this was happening. They don't want to hear it. And they don't want to hear it outside of the office. So again, I've actually had people say, thank you for bringing it to my attention. I didn't know everybody was talking about me. And this particular scenario was the financial issue. So we were able to resolve that for him. And then in another situation, it was more of what Tom's mentioning. It was actually a medical condition. And it was something we were able to, through discussion and exploration with their physicians, we were able to find solutions there too. So it is an awkward conversation. It's not one to just avoid, which a lot of people would like to, because it's not anybody's favorite thing to do is to sit somebody down and say things like this. But it's one that in HR, we have a responsibility, and we have a responsibility because we need to be people talking to people, but also from Tom's standpoint, from the legal perspective.
Terry, you brought up the reaction of somebody who responds with sort of belligerence, right? I don't want to hear it. This is not my thing. We've been talking about the more sort of delicate, congenial kinds of awkward conversations. What opportunity do you have to affect change with somebody who is ideologically disposed to not?
A lot of times it's actually being open with them about the potential for a hostile work environment claim to come to the company, to them. So we have to address it as a company. It's not something that we can pretend is not happening or what have you, and I always would assure them it's not one person complaining, because the person that's defensive will say, oh, I bet I know who said that about me because they don't like me. And I always assure them and say that's the company wouldn't necessarily respond this deeply into this if we didn't have reason to believe it was accurate. So whether it's our observations personally as manager or HR, or it's multiple employee complaints coming forward.
One of the other things, Pete, that I think makes a difference is creating a policy up front. Try and put a policy in your handbook to address dress code and appropriate dress in the workplace, and put something simple in there like you must have deodorant. You must use deodorant appropriately in the workplace. Or to Terry's point about cologne, perfume, whatever it might be. And that helps HR because you can then point back to the policy and say, here, we've had this policy in here a couple of years, just letting you know, reminding you, sometimes the reminder, sometimes that may diffuse the angry employee. It's right. At some point, the employee might just say, I don't care, I'm so offended what's happened to me, and you might end up with this claim somewhere, or someone might quit.